Now that we've flipped the calendar into 2025, the 2024 season is behind us. It's time to give you my updated Dynasty running back rankings. I've got a list of about 40 players here. Let's start with tier numero uno. There are two running backs that stand alone for me in that tier. That is Jahmyr Gibbs and that is Bijan Robinson. Yes, I do have Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Bijan Robinson. This is not some reactionary take. In fact, if you go back and look at the last time we did Dynasty running back rankings, that was October 17th on this channel. I had Jahmyr Gibbs at that point ahead of Bijan Robinson. And I don't see a reason not to have Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Bijan at this point. I mean, if you look just over the year of 2024 itself, we've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who had more rushing touchdowns than Bijan Robinson. He averaged almost a full yards per carry higher than Bijan Robinson. He had more receiving yards despite having almost 10 less targets than Bijan Robinson. And he had more receiving touchdowns, 4-1 for Bijan Robinson. He averaged more points per game, 21.3 compared to 20.1 for Bijan Robinson. He had more points per game overall this entire season. Jahmyr Gibbs, the RB1 overall finish on a points per game. You know, it would have been Saquon Barkley. He didn't play last game, but on a points per game, the RB2 overall. But that doesn't mean that Bijan Robinson isn't also deserving of being in this tier. You know, average almost 5 yards per carry, was at 5.8 this year. Over 1,400 rushing yards. Also had almost 500 receiving yards. Almost had 2,000 all-purpose yards. We obviously know that Jahmyr Gibbs got closer to that point than him. But two, top 15 first-round draft picks, elite level talents that have been balling out since rookies, and have taken a huge step from their rookie season to their sophomore season in the NFL. Complete centerpieces to their offenses. I don't see a reason to have either of these guys outside the top tier. If you want to put Bijan 1 because there's no Monty there, that's fine. But I think there's enough evidence over the last couple of years that that's not going to be a problem for Jahmyr Gibbs' career. Moving on to tier numero 2. I mean, that's where my Spanish stops there. Saquon Barkley is my RB3 right now in Dynasty football. And, we were pretty high on Derrick Henry, if you guys remember last year in our Dynasty rookie rankings when he signed with the Baltimore Ravens. And a lot of people had a problem with that because of the age. And, I understand, if you're a rebuilding team in Dynasty football and you're watching this video, you're saying, Saquon Barkley, RB3? I don't want to go build around an older player. He'll be 28 this year. Well, we said this last year. I'm going to continue to say it. The running back position, it so frequently turns over and it looks differently. If you're not addressing the running back position in the span of a 2-year window, then you know something that none of us know. You have a crystal ball that you're looking into that none of us have access to. I think that's how I operate. I'll continue to operate that way, again, in a 2-year window. And in the next 2 years, you're going to find it hard pressed to find a running back you'd rather have outside of Saquon Barkley. Attached to an offense in Philadelphia, that's elite. He's an elite player himself, over 2,000 rushing yards. We know that historic feat that he had, and he only did it in 16 games, by the way. What could his number have been if he played that last game? Averaged almost 6 yards per carry. Didn't have the same receiving work. We expected that when he joined a team with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, but still led the league in fantasy points per game at the running back position, was one of the best picks in fantasy football, point blank period, and he's going to be there for a while. Now, this might be the first big surprise, but I don't see a reason to rank this guy lower than RB4, Bucky Irving. I mean, is this crazy? I don't think it's crazy. Genuinely. Bucky Irving is got to be getting some respect in the Dynasty community. I'm sure it will happen once people start to really evaluate this entire season, this offseason. But Bucky Irving, guys, from week 12 onwards, after their bye week, was the RB6 in fantasy football, averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game. He was very clearly the starter for this team. He took over that role from Rachaad White. Rachaad White became this, really like he was hiding behind the targets, but he became this kind of like third down guy who was getting most of the work through the air where Bucky was dominating on the ground. And why the hell wouldn't they let Bucky dominate on the ground? Guys, Bucky Irving had over 1,100 rushing yards, 5.5 yards per carry. I mean, the dude was an absolute monster this year. Every time he touched the ball, it was like you were seeing him find gold on the field. Missed tackles forced per attempt were super high. Same thing he did at Oregon. He went and did it in the NFL for an offense, by the way, that was one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL last year with Rachaad White as the RB1. I mean, I see no reason not to have him in this tier number 2 rookie year. I mean, if you go back and look at Bijan Robinson's rookie year and what Bucky Irving just did, you're going to be a little bit shocked at the results. I also have Devon Achane in this tier. He is my RB5. And look, if you want to put Devon Achane higher than him, that's fine. You guys know I'm a Devon Achane guy coming into the NFL draft when he was drafted by the Dolphins. But the reality is, between Devon Achane and Bucky Irving, you have two guys that pretty much had the same amount of carries. All right, so Bucky had, I think, 3 or 4 more carries. But if you look at their season totals, Bucky Irving had over 1,100 rushing yards. Devon Achane had 900. Bucky Irving almost had a full yards per carry more efficient than Devon Achane. And if you watch any Dolphins games, you'll know that Devon Achane was really thriving on targets. I mean, if Tyreek Hill actually leaves this team, maybe that's a benefit to him. But if we're honest, if we're Devon Achane owners and we're honest, if you watch those games, you were definitely concerned about the longevity of Devon Achane. Now, elite talent, elite speed, freak athlete, right? Super fun guy to watch. I'm not suggesting we should be concerned about him, but I am suggesting there is a chance I think they could have Jalen Wright have a bigger role. How long do they ride him on the ground like this? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But we know the type of season he put up, almost 18 points per game. He was elite, the RB5 overall this year. Y'all know I love me some Devon Achane. If you're watching this video, I assume you're obsessed with Dynasty football just like I am. Well, if you want access to our 2025 rookie report where we break down the entire rookie class this year, then all you got to do is become a yearly Mother Flocker member with the promo code LAND. When you sign up to become a yearly member on the Mother Flocker tier with our code, you also get a team playbook, which is a direct guide customized to your team on your game plan for the 2025 offseason. Let's get back to the video. You can check out the pinned comment if you got any interest in that. All right, moving on to tier number 3. We have a lot of guys that I consider vets. We have 2 guys who have secured contracts and 2 guys who are on their rookie deals still. Let's talk about Jonathan Taylor here as my RB6. Really up and down season for Jonathan Taylor. Dealt with injuries, was stuck in a really bad offense with Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson was stealing a lot of goal line opportunities for him. They weren't extending drives because Anthony Richardson, I mean, the guy can't complete a pass to save his damn life, but in the back half of the season, we saw shades of that, special RB1 Jonathan Taylor to end the season. In the playoffs, he was one of the best running backs. And funnily enough, despite being the RB12 overall this year, he only played 14 games and he averaged 17.5 points per game. That's the RB7 overall in points per game. Has a long-term contract. There's security in his position, from this team. Next running back we'll talk about here is Breece Hall. Pretty easily, there's not a running back that has fallen further in my rankings. Tier 1 guy before the year, high expectations, well respected in the Dynasty community. This entire offense was pretty bad for the New York Jets this year. But Breece Hall, the offensive line wasn't good, but he wasn't great himself. Averaged about 4.2 yards per carry. He had a pretty good, couple games to end the season. He still had 76 targets, which really elevated his fantasy floor. He averaged 15 points per game, but we saw Braylon Allen at times get, an important role in this offense. Then we saw when Breece Hall was injured, Isaiah Davis came in and looked fantastic. So a guy who doesn't have a long-term contract with his current team, a team that is in complete despair, will they extend Breece Hall long-term? Does that mean Breece Hall becomes a free agent? I'm struggling to really value Breece Hall right now. I do think he's a fantastic player. I do think there is still that special Breece Hall in there, but how is this offense going to look? There's so many questions right now on this team. Next, we'll talk about Josh Jacobs, who honestly you could have ahead of Breece Hall if you wanted. There's long-term security for Josh Jacobs on this team. The talk about Marshawn Lloyd last year, obviously we can look back and say a little bit overblown. He was clearly the guy in this backfield, had over 300 rushing attempts in this offense. I mean, only Jonathan Taylor, Bijan, Kyron, Derrick Henry, and Saquon had more rushing attempts on their team, their respective teams, than Josh Jacobs did this year. He was the definition of a workhorse, almost 1,400 receiving yards, over 1,600 all-purpose yards. Finally got that receiving touchdown, which was great to see. Was a dominant guy second half of the season, 15 rushing touchdowns, over 17 points per game, long-term contract, history of success. And then we'll finish this tier with Ken Walker. And to be honest, I don't know what to think about Ken Walker. He could be a sell right now. I really struggle to wrap my head around Ken Walker right now. It's a very peculiar situation because obviously they drafted Zach Charbonnet in the second round, and that was a different regime. But then, this year when Ken Walker is healthy, he's a clear dominant guy. But then when Zach Charbonnet comes in, he looks fantastic. He looks like a starting running back himself in the NFL. Do they look at that this offseason? Does the new offensive coordinator, because there will be a new offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb is out, does he adjust the way this running back room looks? I don't know. So there's a lot of question marks. He's a great talent, but he thrives on big runs. He thrives on explosive plays. There's not really that consistency. Will they kind of switch things up? I would be willing to sell Ken Walker at this point myself, but I still put respect on him in tier number 3. All right, let's move on to tier number 4. I really like this tier, but there are some question marks. For example, Kyren Williams is the first running back in this 4th tier. And funnily enough, big concern heading into the season was, what will Blake Corum's role be? Well, that wasn't the issue at all. Blake Corum really didn't have a role that was significant at all. Kyren Williams comes out here, 316 attempts, top 5 in the NFL, almost 1,300 rushing yards. But here's the big warts on Kyren Williams' game this year. The efficiency completely fell off. All right. You go from a guy that was super efficient last year to this year on a high amount of touches, averaged about 4 yards per carry. It just wasn't the same efficiency. And I'm wondering, how long does Sean McVay give him the lion's share of work if the efficiency isn't going to be there? We also saw a huge step back in target share as well with Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, these guys getting healthier. Throughout points of the season, the target share just wasn't the same as it was last year either. Regardless, still finished with 14 touchdowns. His season really thrived off of attempts and touchdowns, and averaged over about 17 points per game. I like him, but I still have the same concerns long term with Kyren Williams. Chase Brown, let's talk about next. Now, here's what I'll say. I have no doubts the Chase Brown stands are going to come at me in the comments, and they're going to have no patience for this take. But here's what I'll say. This is a stacked running back class. All right. Chase Brown was fantastic. By the time Zach Moss, left this team with that neck injury, Chase Brown was one of the best running backs in fantasy football. I totally hear you guys, but it's not like he was averaging 5 yards per carry, right? He had 4.3 yards per carry, a decent number, not going to be game changing, not changing your entire offense. He's a good, decent, reliable starting running back. But in a class in 2025 with 20 deep names that you could see as starters in the NFL, why would the Bengals not consider adding a name? I mean, a lot of these teams are going to add competition. So, it's the same thing I tried to beg people to understand with Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce's rookie year, nobody wanted to hear it from me. You're an idiot, Zach. And then Dameon Pierce falls off. We can even go back to Tyler Algier. I'm begging people. I'm saying, hey, there's a chance that the Falcons could take a running back in round 1. If, Tyler Algier was great as a rookie, 1,000-yard season, but that's not going to stop this team from going out and drafting a Bijan Robinson. The reality is, if Ashton Genty's on the board, Chase Brown's not going to stop the Bengals from drafting him. It's not going to stop the Bengals from drafting Omarion Hampton in the second round, Caleb Johnson in the second round. There's a good chance he could have more competition. And, we've seen this story time and time again. But here's what I will say. And if you're a Chase Brown guy, please listen to this. If he comes past the NFL draft completely unscathed, free agency completely unscathed, then I'll probably put him inside my top 7. Probably. So just, let's take a chill pill there. James Cook next. Pretty good season, but his usage is so confusing. 1 week he'll be the workhorse, the next week they don't care about him, and Ray Davis gets work, Ty Johnson gets work. Great player, confusing usage. Christian McCaffrey, easily the best buy low at the running back position right now, in my humble opinion. He will be up there in age, 28, 29, but I don't care. This team just signed him to a long-term extension before this season. He's going to come back. Clearly, the offense missed him, right? I mean, we can't look at this offense this year and say, wow, what was missing? Well, Ayuk went down, but McCaffrey was really the engine. that was running this offense the year before. He's going to come back. He'll have an entire offseason to get healthy. He's easily the easiest buy for contenders in Dynasty right now. David Montgomery, another fantastic buy for anyone out there in, a competing situation. Averaged 15.8 points per game, had 12 rushing touchdowns in just 14 games, pretty much almost averaged a touchdown per game. We know his role is solidified, that bruiser in this offense, a great offense to be a part of. Let's talk about Chuba Hubbard next. Probably the best surprise, if you had him on your roster, of any running back in Dynasty football this year, right? This team just drafts Jonathan Brooks. Well, he might be ready week 1. Well, Jonathan Brooks might be ready week 4. Well, it's almost at the end of the year, and Chuba Hubbard's dominating this team, and then he gets the contract extension. It's Chuba Hubbard is the RB1 on this team. It doesn't matter that they wasted a pick on Jonathan Brooks in the second round. He was fantastic, average almost 5 yards per carry, almost 1,200 rushing yards, only 15 games, was used in the air, over 16 points per game this year. I mean, what a revelation the Panthers found with Chuba Hubbard in year 3. Is this year 3 or 4? I can't remember. Let's also finish this tier on Tyrone Tracy, another name that, again, if he comes through the NFL draft unscathed, no new competition, we will move him up in our rankings, just like we said with Chase Brown. Tyrone Tracy, one of my favorite sleepers in this class, my guy in this class, comes into this offense, dominates this role, used in the air, used on the ground. Devin Singletary is not an issue, but again, Tyrone Tracy, as much as I love him, is not going to stop the Giants in round 2, 3, drafting one of these great running backs in the 2025 class. So it's something that we have to keep a pulse on. Moving on to the next tier, we're going to label this tier the vets, and that's exactly what it is. Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, what do you need me to tell you about these names? You know these guys. I'm not going to pull out a number out of my ass about efficiency or points per game. You know how valuable these guys were in fantasy football this year. We know how good they were for contending rosters, and this is where I would probably value them. If you're a rebuilding team, you have no business owning a Joe Mixon, a Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. But if you're a team that's ready to compete right now, of course you value these guys, and they're going to be guys who get you over 15 points per game. James Conner just gets the contract extension. I will say the name that I'm the most worried about in this tier that might not be deserving of being in this tier is Isaiah Pacheco. Simply put, we shouldn't have had any expectations for him coming back from that injury this year. Tony Pollard had the same injury previously, and he wasn't as efficient as he was until about a year later. So we can't really judge Isaiah Pacheco's efficiency right now because it's been terrible. But the fact that he had that injury, the fact that they had no running back depth and we're coming into a class in 2025 that is stacked, I definitely believe the Chiefs could look at adding running back in free agency or the NFL draft, and that could impact Isaiah Pacheco's value, considering this team hasn't signed a running back to a long-term deal in the Mahomes era. I mean, have they ever? Is Pacheco going to be the exception? I don't know. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But if you're an Isaiah Pacheco owner, you have to sit there and be honest with yourself and say, I don't know what his future holds. Moving on. The next tier is the question mark tier. Every single one of these running backs have major question marks. Tony Pollard, for example. I mean, Tajay Spears looked like the better running back to end the season. What does that mean? They're on a bad offense. There's potential for them to split touches. Brian Robinson in the first 7 weeks looked like a locked and loaded top 15 Dynasty running back. And then he had a bunch of injuries, and then his RB3 looked more efficient than him, more effective than him. What happens to the Commanders? I mean, do the Commanders fill the running back need here with the 2025 draft? How about Ramondre Stevenson? How many times did the Patriots try and take away Ramondre Stevenson's starting job because of the fumble issues? They let, reports about Antonio Gibson starting and him being up and down, and I just don't know. I know they signed him to that long-term extension, but I would not be shocked at all if this team addresses running back in the draft. How about DeAndre Swift? You got to be absolutely joking me if you're going to sit here and tell me that you think DeAndre Swift is the answer for Chicago at running back. He averaged 3.8 yards per carry. He had 52 targets. I mean, the touchdowns are the only thing that made him relevant. Averaged about 12.6 points per game. I could easily see a running back come in to Chicago through the draft and take that first and second down role. DeAndre Swift should not be in that role. He's never succeeded in that role except for being with the Philadelphia Eagles behind a great offensive line. How about Rachaad White? Well, I mean, he's valuable because they target the running backs in Tampa Bay, but how do you see any long-term value with Rachaad White, considering Bucky Irving's just the better player? How about Najee Harris? He's a free agent. We have no idea where Najee Harris is going to play next year. How about Zach Charbonnet? He looked just as good as Ken Walker, but every time Ken Walker's healthy, Ken Walker's the RB1. It's like, it would make sense to split the carries, but they don't do it. How about Travis Etienne? The fall from grace. The man who finished RB3 last year, and this offense in general was absolute shit. Travis Etienne wasn't good. They were trying to get Tank Bigsby more involved. I still think there is an elite level, not an elite, a very good player in there. I just don't know what that means. J.K. Dobbins, incredible season coming back from the Achilles with the Chargers, but he was on a one-year deal. Why wouldn't the Chargers consider running back in round 2? Why wouldn't they consider running back in round 3? Do they bring J.K. Dobbins back? Maybe. Is it a one-year deal, a 2-year deal? We don't know. How about Aaron Jones? The guy's already 30 years old. He was on a one-year deal with the Vikings. What's his future hold? How about Rico Dowdle? Look, Rico Dowdle was great. He was very effective for the Dallas Cowboys, but it is the #1 talking point on any Dallas Cowboys beat reporter or website that they need to address the run game. So why wouldn't they draft a running back? Question marks across the board at every single player. And the last tier that we will talk about here, I labeled it look away, because quite frankly, there's not anything exciting to talk about with any of these names. Trey Benson. I loved you, Trey, but they just signed James Conner to an extension. I think you're a talented player on a per-touch basis. You've been fantastic. I have no doubt that you could have been an effective starting running back for this team, but they signed James Conner to a long-term extension. How about Tank Bigsby? Well, when Travis Etienne is healthy, the last regime decided Travis Etienne is probably going to get most of the work. You know, there were games where it was back and forth, but it's up and down. How about Javonte Williams? Javonte Williams has been completely mid, the definition of mid. Couldn't win a backfield that consisted of Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime. I mean, why would he win a backfield anywhere else? Jalen Wright, love the player. Does he get more opportunities in year 2? Tajay Spears, love the player, but they make Tony Pollard their workhorse guy. Blake Corum, love the player, but again, they're not giving him opportunities. Jonathan Brooks just tore his ACL again in the same knee late in the season, and he's going to have maybe his first chance to compete with this team in his 3rd year of his rookie contract that only has 4 years on it. Braylon Allen. Sure, Braylon Allen was fine, you know, as a backup to Breece Hall. But when Breece Hall was out, Isaiah Davis looked like the better running back. How about Isaac Orendo? I love Isaac Orendo. I'm not going to say anything bad about him because I love him. I got hate for loving him last year. So I'll say Isaac Orendo, my king. I think he'll be the backup for the Niners this year. He was very efficient. If you actually look at touches, minimum 800 or 880 rushing attempts this year, he was top 7 in yards per carry and explosive run rate. He was fantastic. How about Jaylen Warren? I mean, what did they do at running back in Pittsburgh? Surely Jaylen Warren is not going to be the starting running back for this team. Surely they're going to bring someone else in. How about Kendre Miller? Well, every time he gets an opportunity, he looks fantastic. But the man can't stay healthy, man. It's like how, quite frankly, can I be honest with you guys? After, look at that voice crack. After tier number 4, unless you're a competing team with the vets, I love the vets. But after tier number 4, everything is just complete chaos with running backs in Dynasty football. I have little to no confidence in any of these other names. And it's like, quite frankly, if you don't have a guy in the top 4 tiers or the top 5 tiers, if you're a contending team, then you don't have a running back that you can rely on. You don't have someone that you can paint a picture that, you know, you're thrilled about. I mean, and there's a lot of other running backs, by the way, that I could have talked about here. So I'll go give some honorable mentions. For example, Ray Davis, Marshawn Lloyd, you know, names like Tyler Algier, Jerome Ford, Vidal, Keaton Mitchell, but it's just, I didn't have enough time for all those names. So I appreciate y'all watching the video. Do me a favor, hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. Last thing I'll say here is I think the 2025 class has a chance to completely shake up this entire landscape of Dynasty football. We'll see if it actually happens. I appreciate you watching the video, and I'll see you guys soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.